what is it? What does it entail? How can I get into this space? And I just thought there's something missing in the market where we could be speaking to everyone about what it is and giving some insight. So just to introduce myself, my name is Olivia Shouler. I'm a manager of the research team at Michael Page. And so my role is all candidate driven. It's all to do with relationships, advising candidates on what they're doing, what they could do, helping with their CV. And then I connect them to consultants who have opportunities that match their preferences. So it's very like fine tuning and getting to know people and what they want. I actually met Jonny, so Jonny Gold, who is the guest speaker today. A couple of years ago, I think 2017, we spoke.
Yeah, around
Yeah.
then, yeah.
Yeah, so at the time, Jonny was studying for his ACA at Bright, Graham Murray. I always say that firm wrong, sorry. And basically, a colleague of mine, Colin Hawkins, actually assisted Jonny with moving to Grant Thornton. Yeah, so if you don't mind, Jonny, if you can just tell us a bit about yourself, just an introduction into who you are and what you're about.
Sure. So thanks for the introduction there, Liv. So yeah, so I'm Jonny. As Liv said, I started off at a small medium-sized firm called Bright Graham Murray, who are based in the West End, and the role was kind of a mix of audit, accounts, bit of tax. So quite normal at a smaller firm. You kind of do a bit of everything. So really enjoyed it there. Had a great time. Didn't really know exactly where I wanted to be. Obviously working towards the ACA, that was my priority. But never really knew where I wanted to go after that. So that's when I got speaking to Liv. So back in, yeah, it would have been 2017 or so.
Yeah.
So we were looking really trying to really have a think about where I wanted to sort of go in my career. And at that time I was thinking maybe consultancy. I was thinking maybe M&A. Probably like you guys at the time didn't really know so much what that meant. Just knew it sounded quite cool. And really I was speaking to Michael Page, and they advised me that actually it'd be really beneficial for me to kind of get that bigger firm experience, really for a couple of reasons. So one of them was to just work with bigger clients. So when you're looking for that next role, it really helps to have had that experience working with bigger firms. It just opens more doors. And secondly, I think, and this has been really important as to where I am today, is really to use that bigger firm network. So at Bright Graham Murray, we didn't really have the other service lines. Whereas at GT, which is where I am today, we have M&A, consulting, all sorts of different service lines. And that was really important because it meant that I had a network on my doorstep that I could utilize, learn from, and ultimately where I am today, move into. So I have sort of skipped a little bit there. So I did move to GT in the end to do financial services audit, and was there for around 18 months or so. And I really enjoyed being at GT. I think moving from a smaller firm to a bigger firm, you kind of there's the social side, which is great, and there's a bit more going on there, but also just seeing how bigger firms do things, a bit more progressive in terms of approach to accounting and auditing, just a little bit more fast paced. And obviously I had that bigger firm experience as well.
Yeah, because some clients are quite particular on that. Like some don't mind so much the smaller firm candidates who've just done smaller firm, but then others are really, for corporate finance, it's like the best thing to do is to get that larger firm exposure, isn't it? To then move in house with it.
Yeah. So I think, as you say, it kind of works both ways, and it sometimes some depends what type of firm you want to move into. Sometimes they like the fact that you've worked with smaller companies, it's a bit more messy, and you're a bit more hands-on. But yeah, certainly with corporate finance, I think it helps to have had that to work with sort of larger firms. But really, the main thing for me was that network, which led me to where I am today. So going to GT allowed me to. I think the biggest lesson that I learned was just being able to sort of speak to everyone within the different teams to really get an understanding of where I wanted to go. So, this isn't a talk of where I said, actually, I knew when I started the ACA, I wanted to go in transaction services by the time I was, 28, 29. It wasn't like that at all. I really benefited from just speaking to people, and that's, we'll come to that later on. But the big thing that I really recommend is just utilizing your network. And if you're not at a bigger firm, or if you are a bigger firm now, definitely take advantage of that, speaking to different service lines.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's good as well just to hear other people's perspectives on things too, because there's nothing like hearing firsthand experience. Like us talking to you today is going to be good just for insight. So obviously you're currently in the transaction services team. Can you just kind of give us a bit of insight into that role? Because obviously within corporate finance, there's so many different kind of avenues you can go into. And a lot of the time, candidates will say, I just want corporate finance. And I'll be like, cool, which strand looks appealing to you? Oh, I don't know. I want something commercial and forward facing and sexy. And I'm like, okay. But I think it'll be good for us to have a little bit of insight into, as a TS role, what kind of work you're doing kind of day to day.
Yeah, sure. So TS is, as you say, it's a strand of corporate finance. Corporate finance is a very broad term, which I think we're going to come on to in a bit more detail later on. But effectively, in TS, so what we do is, and kind of there's the sort of the CV description, which I'll start with, and then try and unpick that a bit. But effectively, what we do is manage and deliver due diligence reports, both buy and sell side, for either corporate or private equity clients. So what that kind of means in practice, and I think it's important for you just to start off by saying, there's two strands to what we, two types of work really. You've got the buy and the sell sides. So I appreciate some of you might know what that is and some might not, and it's fairly intuitive, but it's quite important to start off with. So on the buy side, obviously we work with clients whereby they've found a company, they've agreed provisional terms with the seller, and they've called us in and said, we found company X, we're keen to push on with it, but we'd like you to come in and do your due diligence on it, which I'll come to in a second what that involves. And then on the sales side, we're involved slightly on in the process. So a company, a hotel comes to us and says, we're looking to go to market in a few months' time. We want to sell our business, but we want you to write a report for us about our business, which we can then use when we go to market and give to the other side, to give them to show them effectively where we're tracking, and then the buy side can then do their own due diligence on that. So yeah, I think it's just quite important to be aware there's kind of you working on two different sides, and obviously that's different to what we would have done in audit and accounts, where there isn't that kind of you're not on the side, you're just an objective party. So effectively in due diligence, what we do is we will what we're focused on is trying to understand. Obviously, we're looking at the financials of a business, so we start off on the buy side. It's probably a bit easier to understand. We'll look at company X's financials, and so there is a sense of we are assessing the financial statements, kind of what you would have presumably, I don't know what obviously background you guys are in, but if you're in audit and accounts, you've got to be able to read and understand financial statements as your first step. But then the really important bit is actually, well, what do those what are they telling us? So we'll look at things like KPIs. That's really the main thing we're interested in, is like, well, what really drives this business? So, we're not really fussed to the financial statements, what do they agree? What do what's the debtors number? We want to understand what does that mean for our client who's buying this business? Is revenue flatlining for a certain product? Is our staff costs going up, but revenue's not concurrently going up? Why is that? So we're like really delving into what do these numbers mean. Yeah, kind of, but it's just a lot more commercial. We're not. This is the really big thing of what we do and why I enjoy it. We don't just look at something because a methodology tells us we need to look at something. We look at something because it matters to our client, the buyer or the seller, because that's effectively what we're trying to do, is say, look, revenue is on average sale price is declining year on year. If this continues, margins are going to, potentially go to a point where it's not going to be viable for you to take them over. So we're really just trying to really drill into what these numbers mean and what drives the business. So another example, so with say a restaurant, we'd look at average price, average spend per customer, number of restaurants, that kind of thing. So it's you wouldn't get that in audit. You wouldn't really delve into that level of detail. But this is a lot more commercial.
So do you feel like that gives you quite a lot of variety in your work, from client to client? Like there's lots of different things going on with different people all the time, kind of.
Yeah, massively, because there's no, an audit, again, not to go back to it, but there is that sense of there's that roll forward sense, you
Yeah,
do an audit year on year, you kind of roll
all
forward
backwards.
looking at, I was guilty. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. It's kind of there is obviously an element of things change year to year,
yeah.
but there is quite a sense of a roll forward, whereas obviously every deal is unique, no deal is the same,
Hmm.
no buyer and seller are the same. Sometimes obviously we do work with the same buyer on
Yeah.
multiple transactions, so there is some overlap, but yeah, it's very, very varied, and that makes it quite technically challenging because you are pretty much starting from scratch at each point, but
Yeah.
that's kind of really where you learn. I've learned so much in this job because you are always thinking on your feet.
Mm. Yeah, it must be quite like exciting not having the same old kind of predictability and being able to kind of flux and do more in certain places, less in other places, different types of like bit by bit by bit. Um, so I think that's given us like a really good idea of like your role like in the TS side and obviously the due diligence and all that,
Mm,
all the different combinations of work that you do within your current role. Obviously within corporate finance as a whole, there's two
yeah.
different parts, isn't there? So you've got the capital and the group.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think corporate finance, trying to actually define corporate finance is quite
Yeah.
difficult, and
Same.
I probably Google searched this so many times, as I'm
Same.
sure Liv
Like
has.
once
What
a
does that
week
actually mean? It
without
sounds
fail.
great, but
Yeah.
yeah, effectively kind of how I look at it and how I look at it, or I say I'm not taking the credit because I have Googled it many times, but there's really kind of two main areas.
Yeah.
One is concerned with effectively corporate finance is strategically what's the corporate strategy for that business in terms of how it's financed and how it's structured. So it's mix of debt and equity. So for
Yeah.
example, in corporate finance, there's a debt advisory team at a lot of
Yeah.
say big four, not as more boutiques, not really GT, but bigger firms. There's a team who will be focusing on basically advising clients on what's the optimal, level of debt and equity in that business. So should they be taking on more debt? Should they issue more shares? That kind of thing. It's
Mm.
quite specialist, but it does come up. It's not really something we do in TS, but it is
Yeah.
definitely an area you can go into. And then there's more what we do in TS and lead advisory, which we'll come to in a second, which is
Yeah.
how group structure. So whether you disposing, acquiring, reorganizing, and that's what we effectively support in what we do in TS. We assist clients in their acquisitions and disposals.
Hmm.
So I think that's probably if
The two.
so
Yeah.
not a short, and I don't think it's a quick way of saying it, but if you kind of think of it, yeah, there's kind of two elements. You've got the capital structure, debt and equity, and the group structure, acquisitions and disposals is probably the best way to look at it.
Cool. Yeah. And then when we have the two basically like halves, kind of halves it, two elements. Obviously within those elements, you touched on them briefly, but obviously people mention M&A, the TS side. Like, can you just obviously it might be harder to say it in like a sentence or two, but with each element, like how are they different? So say mergers and acquisitions, obviously to me it kind of it is what it is, like mergers and acquisitions.
Acquisitions, yeah.
But if we could just go into a tiny bit more about the title and just a little bit more on what that actually looks like.
Sure, sure. So the M&A mergers and acquisitions is kind of really the whole process from
Mhm.
the very start, actually
Yep.
formulating strategy. What do we want to do? Do we want to buy? Do we want to sell? Do we want to wait to the very end of when the deal closes? So effectively, it's what we call an end. It's more of an end-to-end deal role. So you will typically, and if you went, these roles are more what we call lead. It varies from place to place, but in
Yep.
bigger firms, it's known as lead advisory. So you'll be tasked with initially formulating the strategy. Once you've done that, say right, we want to sell our company. So then the next stage is right, we need to find potential buyers, we need to contact buyers, see what the interest is,
Mhm.
and then from there, I won't go into this all the minutiae of it because I
It could be a
probably
whole
don't know.
hour. It
It
could be a
could be
whole
how
hour. Yeah.
exactly.